Now, as I pointed out in this introduction, I wanted the rest of the Native people to understand one typical issue pertaining to indigenous freedom, independence, and sovereignty. Now, the laws that are currently implemented in the books, and they're not pretext, they're actually mandated. The foreign relations between the laws of the United States, there were certain requirements. And Lakota people really pay attention to what we're going to get into here. And this goes for any other nation seeking their independence and sovereignty. Because when you recognize the validity of the belief system, we go back to how a permanent, population takes that control as a government to neutralize the base of people's value system to implement their real territorial independence. The Lakota have a vast majority of Indian country, and there are 5 states: South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and Nebraska. Now, the document title to all these things are implemented through law that America is afraid to live up to and honor. Now, over the years, many Lakota nations and many other people took this challenge on, and it wasn't typical, but the quality of being prevalent enough to hold the United States policies in accordance to its own accuracy. Now, one has to keep in mind that recognizing the violations through the genocidal, behavior, the United States Supreme Court knew that there was a standing still in place. Generally, when you look at the United States versus the Sioux Nation, you will see that these laws that were supposedly never rescinded, when you look at the 1851 and 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, you will see among other provisions that gave whites safe passage in our own country, they never ever gave them the attempt to occupy what we know as Indian country. And so the vast majority of the Caucasian settlers, because when they were on the verge of relocating themselves, if you go back into the relocation era, you can also see that it was America at fault, because they wanted their people as a military force to utilize their own ethnicity to destroy people of color for their own territorial land base and the riches that were upon it. Now imagine back in the first context of the colonists when they arrived here, when our people seen gold fragments of rock, maybe the size of a golf ball and larger, football size, just laying everywhere in our sacred Black Hills. And when they say that the best way to give that indication about the behavior of white men, this is what they did. Ah! They get excited. Well, that metal did not make Native people excited, because we didn't know. We knew a different value to it because it came from earth. And that's where Eon comes from. And this is the stories in life that nobody gets into because of the policies and procedures that America utilizes to destroy people with ethnic cleansing. And so when you look at capitalistic control, you continuously see that a majority of our people will never ever utilize the type of material that they had to face the type of courts that give you the validity to exercise your independence with its full capacity of sovereignty. Today, nations and many other tribal governments within the Western Hemisphere are quasi-sovereign. What does quasi-sovereign mean? Quasi-sovereign means it's minimal, that you got to knock on his door and you got to plead to Mr. White Man. Mr. White Man, can you please open the door? You had full independence and sovereignty. You open that door because of your belief system in freedom. And that's where the accountability is. No one does that. So when you look at the inherent sovereignty that the Lakota Nation still have, the validity of its content is not being exercised in its full capacity. Why? Because our tribal governments work with the federal government to neutralize your understanding. The simple understanding to outline this real strong principle. Let's say you're a doctor, and that's the only field that you undertook in their educational system. But that's only a small part of life. And you know about examining people, better known as patients, when they come into the hospital facility. But that's a small part of life. Indigenous thought and philosophy is far and wide and much greater. Because when you take the indigenous people and you live with them inside their neutral territory where the natural law exists with its real intent of sovereignty and freedom, you will see that the behavior of the indigenous people in our national university of life outside, you will see that their brain activity, their heart function is so enormously healthy that they know how to implement the law according to the language. The language was raped at the hands of America. This is why we have never ever took our course of history to implement it into the international courts of law. And when you have people moving in that direction, quasi-sovereign-minded people, at the discretion of Eurocentric governments, attack that base to neutralize that provision. Therefore, they don't want the independence to be success. Now, if you take the majority of everything, and again, Lakota people, you want your black hills back, you got to implement according to the laws that are already intact, but you have done nothing to exercise them with its full capacity. Therefore, it's not a myth, ladies and gentlemen. It was a perpetuated device at the hindsight of life. Because when the Eurocentric man's, ethnocentric, arrogance allowed his behavior to say, no, little Indian, you can't do that. The law says that you can't wage war against me. We have a peace agreement. And it's called the provision of Article 1 on the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. It's better known as the Bad Man Clause. So it's never ever deciphered with that type of court of law at the hands of the American system. And to justify that, to legalize an illegal act of a genocidal treatment against First Nations people, you will see that white America's Eurocentric mindset is still alive, and it destroys every virtue of law that was intended to continue to give us the ability to enforce freedom, independence, in the capacity of sovereignty. And that's how you make a long story short.
So when this time runs